All right, Mayor Stevens, we are now live.
Great. Thank you all and welcome to our City Council meeting regularly scheduled for this September 8th at 7 p.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock.
Present.
Councilmember Bacon.
Present.
Councilmember Watson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg.
Here.
Mayor Stevens.
Here. Thank you very much. Our next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion on this?
I'll move.
Okay. It has been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Councilmember Babcock. Any discussion? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Wonderful. Our next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the special meeting on September 3rd. I'll look for a motion for this.
Motion to approve.
It's been a motion by Councilmember Bacon, seconded by Councilmember Babcock. Any changes to those minutes? Seeing none. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Great, that passes. Lisa, I love you. Trying to unmute and mute. Our next item on the agenda is communications. The first part of this is just an announcement that all written communications received by the council are posted on the online agenda packet. The cutoff for that time is, I believe, 5 or 4 p.m. The day of the council meeting. So if you send something after that, it might not have made it onto the agenda. But if you do see something that wasn't on that written communications that you wanted on there, just let me know. Sometimes folks will send things to like every email on the council rather than just the actual council email, and that might get lost in the fray. And so, you know, I generally try to forward everything that I think should be on this that wasn't directly to me, but that was supposed to be towards the council on here, but sometimes something misses the mark. So just let me know. Our next item on the agenda is communications from the audience. And I believe we have our wonderful council secretary that will be letting folks in to talk. I will again say that we have a 5-minute rule right now on folks talking to us. If you have questions, feel free to ask. We're going to try and answer those at the end of your 5 minutes. So that way you get your full time.
Okay, it looks like the first caller we have on the line is caller with the phone number ending in 563. You are now permitted to address or 963. You are now permitted to address council.
Great.
Hi, this is Alice Dreger. 2 comments tonight. One is with regard to the contract for the city attorney that you have Keller Tama working on. It seems now pretty obvious that we should have had an accounting of the full legal services that have been provided to the city, so that as you go into this process, you would know what it is your shopping list was. There are a lot of different firms that have been providing service to the city. In any given year, I struggle using FOIA to try to understand how many firms we're employing and what we're paying them for, and even what lawsuits we're in. In the past, sometimes when I even FOIA'd what lawsuits we were in, there was one that was left off, namely a lawsuit from citizens against the city for having sewage dumped in their basements on a perfectly nice day. So it would be good if we knew what all those services were in an effort to try to do some cost savings. I think the whole point of choosing a deep bench law firm was to have savings in terms of the economy of scale with regard to what they could handle. So it is now, to my mind, somewhat awkward to have Keller Tama negotiating a contract which might ideally eliminate their services to the city and save us money. So I'm not sure how you want to deal with that, but I would recommend that you consider, I wish I had suggested this weeks ago, getting a full accounting of what different services are being provided to the city. Secondly, somewhat relatedly, I want to strongly encourage all 5 of you to be paying attention to what's going on at the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. It's now become clear that the BRA has at least twice gone into bond resolutions for over $30 million involving a situation where apparently we had no financial advisor at the table, in spite of the fact that our bond counsel in the bond resolution very specifically advised the BRA that they were not providing financial services and that the BRA should engage financial services. In the most recent case, the BRA ended up rescinding after passing the resolution and voting to get a financial advisor, which they're working on this week again, and that's a good thing. But it is more than a little concerning that we've apparently gone into bond placement in a situation a few years ago with the Center City bond where the financial advisor at the table who normally advises the city was in fact working for the developer. And I only figured this out months later when the disbursement came from the bond and it indicated that he was being paid on behalf of working for the developer out of the public funds. So that's all kind of troubling about how that went down. And I think at this point, the city council should probably consider doing an RFP for its own financial advisor. It has historically lately used Brian Loeffler of Robert Baird, but the situation we've found ourselves in at the BRA is, to say the least, troubling. Mr. Kroom ended up having to ask who he was working for, and we were left with nobody working for us in a relatively fraught situation. Relative to that as well, I would like the city council to be paying attention to who's defending us on that bond. Foster Swift is one of the firms that was applying to the DDA/BRA to be their special counsel, which makes a lot of sense. So it's possible you'll be able to just use Foster Swift to help you with this, which would be, I think, very good and also cost saving, but also they'd be probably very good at it. And that's the question of whether or not this bond and a TIF should be paying out a total of $50 million versus $56 million. Mr. Meadows and I and another attorney who does not wish to be named have all pored over this very carefully, and it seems pretty clear that the council intended a $50 million cap on the payout of that bond. Mr. Danoff is saying it's $56 million, and I think it would be important to have an attorney who would defend us to save us, if possible, $6 million. So I think that's something that we really need city council's attention on. I realize this is a sort of very complicated issue, and it's not something that a lot of you or any of you probably have any professional background in, but it is incredibly important. It's really more than $6 million at stake, because it, when the bond gets paid off, saves or costs us money. So I really want to encourage you all to be paying really close attention to the BRA, and hopefully they'll have a financial advisor this week, but there's more to be done, I'm afraid. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Emily, other attendees? Unless somebody from council wanted to respond directly to that. I know there wasn't necessarily a direct question, but. Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock.
Possible to get a list of all of the litigation we're involved in and all of the firms we are contracted with for various items? That actually would be a helpful thing to have. I should have asked you for this earlier, I guess. I think
you were cut off just right in the beginning. I believe that was a question of the city manager, correct? Yes, to the, Mr. Lahanas, please.
Yeah, I can ask the firms. And also to Alice's point that Keller Toma should be excluded from the review, your RFP specifically excluded personnel items and said there's a separate firm that handles those items. So it was not envisioned that they should be doing personnel work. It specifically excluded that. So I'm not sure if that point has any bearing on the review by Keller Toma, because I think that your RFP specifically stated a separate firm handles those issues. So, but I can get that information for you.
Thank you.
Great. Emily, would you mind letting in the next caller?
All right, caller with the phone number ending in 858. You are now permitted to address council.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
So this is Karen Honey from the HRC. I don't have any public comment tonight, but I just was wanting to make myself available for when you get to the discussion of the use of force ordinance, because I know we sent you stuff that may be possibly confusing. So I'm just going to keep this on in the background, and when you get to that point in the agenda, I will be available for questions, which I may or may not have answers to.
Great. And just a point of clarification, this is the disorderly conduct code, correct? Not...
Sorry, the disorderly conduct. Yes, thank you.
Yep. All right. No problem.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a point in response to that, if folks do have questions, we obviously do have Karen here from the HRC. I'd be more than happy to allow her in the room if there are questions. I'm just getting nods in general of approval, but I don't think that that's something that is outlandish. So great. Emily, would you mind letting in anybody else?
Okay. The last person that we have on the line so far is Crystal Davis. You are now permitted to address council.
Hello, City Councilman. I am here to second the support for our HRC regarding the disorderly conduct ordinance, as well as wanting to draw attention again to the study committee or the oversight, police oversight commission, and making sure that dates are set for the work for that to be moved forward, so that we're able to have timely revisions and recommendations for the new policing contract. So I think it's very imperative and something that should be thoroughly discussed and that set forth so everyone who is able to participate can participate, and that we can have sufficient discussion on those revisions. So I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as a point, I was going to talk about this a little bit during my own comments, but since it was brought up, you'll see on our consent agenda the approval of Kelly Ellsworth Etchison to the Police Oversight Study Committee. At one of our previous council meetings, we noted that because of honestly a happy occurrence, Ron Bacon was appointed to our city council. And so he could not fill his role on the Police Oversight Study Committee. So we had a vacancy there. We had to fill that vacancy, obviously, before we set meeting times. So I will not ask for a formal answer on this, but I am going to just say with a good amount of confidence that hopefully, given the approval of this appointment tonight, staff is going to work almost immediately to start setting those dates and working with the folks that are on that board to make sure that these meetings start commencing very, very soon. It's a priority of mine. I think it's a priority of them. And, you know, we want to be cognizant of these folks' schedules because they are volunteers. So, you know, some outreach to them is necessary, but just know that that's going to happen very, very quickly. And this was kind of the last step in the process to make that happen. So appreciate everybody coming in and talking about it. Great. Emily, is there anybody else that is in the participants?
It looks like we have another caller. So
Great.
Caller with a phone number ending in 432, you are now permitted to address council.
Caller ending in 432, if you could just hit *6 on your phone, you should be able to speak to council. There you go. I think you're unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right, thank you. This is the first time I've had to go through that *6, so I apologize.
All good.
Chuck Grigsby here. Just giving you guys all a good call. Thank you for allowing me to speak in tonight. Just a couple of quick things. I just really wanted to talk about the committee process as a community member who wants to be involved with the commission or board. The process is not user-friendly, to say the least. Just for particular HRC, I know that we have, myself included, another member who had some adversity trying to get in on a commission. And so that person, I will just speak for myself, where you come in, you apply for a commission, you send your information in, and it kind of seems to go into a black hole. I just think for someone who wasn't as aggressive as me as calling in and following up, I probably would still be sitting waiting to hear back to be involved with commission work. I know another commissioner on my particular committee that I'm working on had to wait at least 4 or 5 months to get involved based on the time period that he applied. I know there's people right now who are pending that are in limbo right now about getting involved that were actually recommended. So I have issues with that. I did call on behalf of myself and another community member in regards to some clarifications about the rules in regards to participation on commissions, and I have called and I've emailed at least 5 times and have gotten nothing back as far as a response. So I just think the whole process of how that is handled needs to be really looked at, and it's really, really important because I know there are a lot of people, good people in the community that want to get involved, that want to have their voice be heard and have a seat at the table. The other quick thing I wanted to bring to your attention is the clarification on the OMA, the Open Meetings Act. I just know that we've had a history just from a community standpoint with understanding with that is very clear in what to do. And then also as a committee member, I just really want to make sure that we're diligent in being able to make sure that we abide by the rules, especially when you have this Oversight Commission who is coming up. You know, have people who are involved that may not necessarily be involved regularly when it comes to some of these different meetings, which will be covering some very, very important topics that will be open to scrutiny and questioned by some bigger entities than ourselves. So we just want to make sure that that is done. So I was hoping that we could get some type of clarification, some type of notice published about exactly how to go about that. I know that we do have that publicly, stated somewhere in the universe, but when I go to the City of East Lansing's website, I have no point of reference when it comes to being able to make sure that I'm abiding by those rules. And other commissioners, I would be confident to say that we all have our own definition of what that really is about how to go about that process with MA. Lastly, I just really want to address the last meeting, Mayor Stevens, you had talked about in response to a caller who was giving you some information in regards to kind of really the whole social justice equity in East Lansing. You get pretty passionate about it. You said some things like you think this council is really committed to that. This is one of the hardest things outside the COVID-19 public health issue that we have going on, and you're looking for conversation moving forward. I know back in June, I believe, I raised up the issue that the city of Lansing had passed racism as a public health issue, and here we are in September. Since I've called in Lansing City Council, Ypsilanti City Council, Flint City Council, Port Huron City Council, Pontiac City Council, Jackson City Council, Romulus City Council, and Detroit City Council all have passed the racism as a public health issue in there, and they have prioritized that and had that on the agenda as soon as the community members have brought it to their attention. So I challenge this council to get that in play if you haven't done that already when it comes to prioritizing some of the different things that you say that you understand what the struggle is when it comes to this disparity with social justice and equity and equality in East Lansing. And thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. And I'll take a point of privilege and respond to a couple of these things. So one, Chuck, I agree with you 100%. And I think that we should take the lead of some other communities that have done a really great justice in declaring this a public health crisis. So I'm going to ask in a formal way, because we're at a meeting right now, that maybe the council secretary will work with me to get that on a future agenda. And by future agenda, I mean that is, as soon as possible. Taking the lead from some other cities that have done this before. And obviously we want to be the leaders, but I'm certainly not opposed to taking, following some great work that other folks have done, declaring racism as a public health issue. So very, very happy to do that. Thank you for calling in and repeatedly pushing on that. In terms of commissions and responses, in terms of interviews, I agree with you. I think it's something that this council should address. I think that, when you have a situation where these are volunteers, commissions, you have city council members that have multiple commissions, and you have different staff liaisons. I myself have gotten confused. And I know that it is an issue for some folks and things get lost in the mist. So I think that that's something that this council should take a look at, is really trying to solidify a further process for it, maybe even working with the city manager to try and consolidate some of the, Mayor Pro Tem, I'll get to you in 1 second, consolidate some of the aspects of how you apply, when you should get a response by, who should be interviewed, when they should be interviewed, that kind of thing. Just because I do think it's important, and I myself have fallen into that where, you know, I'm maybe confused on what the process is or what my role is. So I agree with you. I think it's an issue. I'm glad that you brought it up because I think it's something we should look into. And I think it's something this council should address. Mayor Pro Tem, you had something?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the similar thoughts on the commission process. I actually found out that I was appointed to the Arts Commission when I saw it on the consent agenda. Nobody else had told me that. So, and that's, I've heard that from other people before. So I think just some sort of tracking system, you know, your application has been received. And even I know that we keep those on file for a certain number of years. So maybe every year or so, just kind of reaching out to anybody on file and saying, are you still interested in this?
Yeah.
You know, I think, yeah, just basically just a tracking system would be a huge improvement. So,
Yeah.
thanks.
City manager.
Yeah, I think that that's something we can certainly help with because I believe that our iCompass actually can track board and commission stuff.
Well, that's great.
Organize it for council members to be able to see who's applied and where they are in the process. So that's
Yeah.
something that Emily and I can work on and get out to you guys so you can, you know, be able to catch up on that more regularly and see what, you know, what step people are. And I think that there have been times when people haven't gotten a fast enough letter after they've interviewed.
Right.
Some people are appointed, they don't. So that's something we can certainly improve on.
No, and thank you, city manager. I agree with you. This is something, and I am cognizant of the fact that, you know, it's staff members that are doing the jobs of several people, and, you know, sometimes applications might be sent to council members, they might be sent to the staff liaison, different things, and things do get lost in the mix, but that really shouldn't be our excuse, right? So I think, you know, folks want to serve their community. We should be encouraging that. We should make sure that we're doing everything to make sure they can. So I appreciate that comment. It's definitely something I've faced myself, but you know, I think it's something we should address. So just another thing to add onto the list to get working on. I appreciate the comments, sir. Okay, do we have anybody else that
just one. I think I got about 10 seconds or 40 seconds left. I just want to say back to the public health issue with racism as far as the ordinance is concerned. I've been working with Michigan United, and they're the reason why majority, if not all of those cities, councils that I mentioned have passed that ordinance relatively quickly because this is what they do. The names are Leslie Matthews and Ngana Shah will be the contact people. And I will forward to you after this meeting tonight, their emails, their ordinances that they've passed. And so you'll have hopefully maybe a template to make that work easier for you going forward, if that's okay.
That'd be great. Honestly, that is very, very good information because that's not something I knew, but now I do. So I appreciate that, sir.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you. Emily, do we have anybody else that's in the audience?
I believe that's all we have for tonight.
Okay, great. Our next item on the agenda is communications from the mayor and council members. I will start, as I always do, on my left in no particular order. Mayor Pro Tem. Sorry.
I spend my last few hours before the council meeting reviewing the agenda, and I always forget about this part. So I never have anything prepared to say, and then I ramble. I wanted to, we got a little bit of news from MSU this morning, a spike in COVID cases, 120 some positive cases, which is probably honestly underreported based on the information that accompanied that. And that is a little disheartening. And it was also disheartening last week, the, I forget exactly, the fraternity council, the
IFC.
Yes, the IFC failed to pass a resolution to suspend social gatherings, which was also very disheartening. And so I had kind of two disappointing pieces of news regarding COVID and MSU reopening. But I wanted to, instead of concentrating on those things, I just wanted to say that I do see that the vast majority of MSU students are really taking a high level of personal responsibility. And I appreciate that. And I think, you know, we do notice that you are working hard to keep us all safe, and we appreciate that. And it's really unfortunate that a small number of bad actors are kind of holding the spotlight, when really I think the story should be that we've got tens of thousands of people on campus who are, or not on campus, off campus, who really are acting very responsibly. And that number of 120 some positive cases out of the full student body is a very small percentage. And I think that that speaks really to the level of personal responsibility that most MSU students are giving this problem. And I just wanted to give a firm pat on the back, I guess, to those people that are really doing the hard work in spite of a few people not. So thank you. I see you and you're appreciated.
Thank you for that. And I have that list too that I'll be reading in my comments as well. Councilmember Watson.
I just wanted to add to what Chuck was saying, just that Ingham County Health Department, or Ingham County, declared racism as a public health crisis. And I'd just be more than happy to help out, or just, supply that information as well. And I won't go into that. I also wanted to mention tomorrow, for my day job, I will be at some community COVID testing events in East Lansing, at Deer Path, and at our Bailey Senior Apartments. Yep. And so, hopefully I can get rested tonight and be chipper and ready to get folks registered and tested and stuff. But just, in it to support the community and to hopefully get through this sooner rather than later.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Watson. And to your point, if you would like to be involved in that, you obviously have a good background on both issues that this relates to. So I would be more than happy for you to be involved, or even take the lead on it. More than happy either way. So
thank you.
Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. As Mr. Grigsby and the mayor have mentioned, we are going to we're going to finalize the last appointment to the Police Oversight Study Commission. And I have been asked about the ordinances that I have proposed dealing with police oversight and other things. As most of you know, I drafted a temporary police oversight plan. I am confident that the study committee is going to come up with something. I had always intended that to be a temporary measure. I have heard from some people that they would rather hold off until the study committee can do its work, and I'm absolutely fine with that. So that's why I'm not pushing for it to go forward. If we feel a need for it, I'm happy to pull it back off the stack and dust it off and go with it. So that should answer some questions. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Councilmember Bacon.
Yeah, just kind of in response to Mr. Grisby's points of emphasis on the public health crisis. I think most importantly, just making sure that none of these measures alone give us an opportunity to exhale at all on the pressure that's on these other areas. If it's not obvious yet, whatever area we don't shore up is going to be the area that's going to break. So I just want to maintain the round robin approach, no slight to that approach and to the sentiment behind it, but just that we keep focus on all areas like we are doing, but that we don't do anything that releases any pressure or makes us pat ourselves on the back, because we got a lot to do. So that was it.
Absolutely agree. Okay, so I have a few things that I wanted to mention, and I'll somewhat respond to actually something the Mayor Pro Tem said in terms of spotlighting good behavior. So this might just be because I am nervous, truthfully, and at some points I'm disappointed when I see behavior that is not in line with what I think this community's philosophy is, which is that we're all in this together and we need to act like it, and I tend to highlight, when I'm out and about, some, less than good things that happen in terms of people responding in a negative way to wearing a mask, or, you know, folks deciding that they're not going to, you know, distance at an appropriate way, or, you know, that they're going to try and party anyway and just board up the windows so we can't see it. And I highlight those things because, you know, they're the things that concern me. They're the things that I look at, and I'm, you know, I'm cognizant of the fact that, you know, 99% isn't enough. You know, that small minority of people can really have a big impact, not only on, you know, other students, but the community at large, our business community, folks that are really hoping to stay safe so we can stay open. I mean, that message is what it's about, right? We want to make sure that, you know, folks can be in their own communities, that we can be safe, but we can also, you know, support our businesses, that we can, you know, make sure people are getting an education, that, you know, we can have a vibrant community. But when we see bad actors, you know, I know in my heart of hearts that's a risk to that reality. And so, you know, to the Mayor Pro Tem's point, I do see so many instances of good behavior. And we had a couple of reporters walking around with me over the past few, or not the past few, but a couple of nights, welcome weekend. And just, I mean, you see East Lansing versus what a normal welcome weekend is. And I think that there's a pretty big difference there. Not a lot of huge parties, still some, not a lot of huge parties, you know, folks outside under that 25 limit. And, you know, I will say that it's not the safest behavior still. If you're really close together, if you're not wearing a mask, if you're not distancing, there's still a risk there. And I would think we will see cases, because even though our rule is at 25, if you're not distancing, if you're not wearing a mask, if you're not part of the same household, maybe you're going in between a few different places, right? There's the risk of spread. And I think we're going to see that. But we can't monitor that. We can't be everywhere at once. And that's just the truth. And so it's on personal responsibility. It's on these individuals to say, you know what, I'm taking a responsibility for my community and I'm doing something about it. And I'm not going to that event. Or if I see something on Facebook that says it's got a 50 attendees in it, I'm telling somebody and I'm calling it out, because that's what we need. And so, you know, there's a lot of really good behavior, but I think we're still trying to get some people on board. And speaking of which, the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned IFC failed to vote against these social gatherings for level 1, 2, and 4 social events. These include events that might be with another organization like a sorority, include people from outside their organization, or big events that generally might be a risk to the health and safety of the community. That's available on greeklife.msu.edu. Included on that site is a letter from President Stanley, a physician with a specialty in infectious diseases, asking them to reconsider. This is important, and I really, really hope that those folks do. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was, you'll see a closed session on our agenda for the city manager's performance. So I wanted to run through a little bit of timeline on that before we got into it. So tonight we will be meeting, if the council votes in favor, in closed session to discuss the performance of the city manager. The discussion tonight will include a verbal presentation by him, as well as an overview of a 360 evaluation that included a self-assessment, peer professionals, direct reports, and indirect reports. This evaluation, I have asked our council secretary to put on our agenda and release to the public after this meeting. Next week on the 15th, I'm hoping to go into another closed session, if it is the will of the council, to continue to discuss the performance of the city manager, including a review of the evaluation, concluding with our own thoughts, taking into account council sides, and further solidifying a more formal conversation of the city manager's performance. And on the 22nd of September, I hope that based on this process, and I hope with the support of Councilmember Babcock, the person who has, you know, been working with me on this in a direct way, I would look to put an extension of the city manager's contract on that agenda for council's consideration. So that's somewhat of a timeline going forward. But I do just want to mention that in a formal way today, so folks could know what you're looking for going forward. All right, that's what I've got. Our next item on the agenda is city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one item, and that is along those lines that I would request the city manager, request to enter into closed session for the purpose of my annual evaluation. And I think that that is planning to come at the end of our agenda. That's all I have. Thanks.
Great, thank you. The city attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. No report this evening.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Will the city manager please read our very long consent?
I will. It's a lengthy one. Bear with me. Consent agenda for council's consideration. Item 3.1, approve the following appointments or reappointments to boards or commissions. 1, Kelly Ellsworth Etchison to the Police Oversight Study Committee. 3.2, approve the First Amendment of the purchase and sale agreement for city parking lot number 4 and adjacent property with MSU FCU to extend the closing date to November 6, 2020 to allow adequate time for city processes and due diligence prior to closing the sale. Item 3.3, approve a resolution accepting the development project agreement for Natural Resources Trust Fund grant number TF19-0032, Patriarch Park Pavilion and Restroom renovation in the amount of $300,000 to renovate the pavilion and both restrooms at Patriarch Park. 3.4, motion authorize the city manager to sign a 1-year renewal agreement with Helping Hands Respite Care, formerly known as LAP Respite Care, for the provision of adult day services at the Valley Court Community Center. 3.5, approve a temporary easement with Harrison Village LLC to allow for installation of the Greetings Tour mural on the property located at 122 North Harrison Road, East Lansing, Michigan. Also authorize the East Lansing mayor to sign and the city clerk to notarize it. 3.6, set a public hearing for October 6, 2020 to consider a special use permit application from Walgreens Company for the property at 100 West Grand River Avenue to allow the sales of packaged beer and wine. 3.7, approve the Humana Medicare Advantage 2021 insurance renewal. 3.8, approve a contract increase in the Hubble, Roth & Clark's professional services agreement for the Woodingham Pump Station Replacement Project in the amount of $36,000 and authorize the city manager to sign. 3.9, approve a sole source contract with Peerless Midwest to rebuild a well pump and upgrade the well casing in amount not to exceed $30,000 and authorize the city manager to sign. 3.10, approve change order number 5 for the Water Resource Recovery Facility biosolids handling improvements with digestion project in the amount of $119,473.40, and that the change order be paid from the WRF's fiscal year 2020 maintenance budget and authorize the city manager to sign. 3.11, approve a resolution authorizing Tracy Sperry to purchase 1 year of service credit for Municipal Employees Retirement System, MERS. 3.12, approve a resolution establishing September 22nd, 2020 as National Voter Registration Day. 3.13, approve the purchase of an ImageCast central high-speed scanning system from Dominion Voting for the amount of $35,350 through grant funding for use in the City of East Lansing Absentee Voter Counting Board and authorize the city manager to sign. 3.14, authorize the city manager to sign the license agreement with the Board of Water and Light, BWL, to install an advanced metering infrastructure, AMI gatekeeper unit, on a wood pole at the East Lansing Soccer Complex. Item 3.15, approve the council board and commission liaison appointments. Item 3.16, approve an agreement with NAI Mid-Michigan for property marketing services for the marketing of approximately 26.8 acres of city-owned property near the intersection of Coleman and West Roads and authorize the city manager to sign. Item 3.17, approve and authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with Jack Doheny Companies in the amount of up to $33,715 for the repair of the city's Vactor 2115 Plus combination jet vac truck and an amount of up to $12,500 for the rental of a replacement truck during the repair period. Item 3.18, approve traffic control order number 485 for the placement and enforcement of parking restrictions in front of the Ann Street Plaza along Albert Avenue. Item 3.19, approve a resolution authorizing the commercial card service agreement and commercial card services with Fifth Third Bank. Those are all the items on the consent agenda for council's consideration.
Anybody like any of these items taken off the consent agenda? Great, seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Bacon. Motion by the Mayor Pro Tem. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify. Oh, sorry, yes.
Just wondering, do we need to change the 3.4 and the 3.14 to say, you know, approve or authorize instead of, do we need to change that officially or?
No, Tom said that was fine, just authorize instead of motion to authorize.
Okay, cool.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Great. Our next item on our agenda is consideration of ordinance 1491, an ordinance to amend or delete various provisions of the disorderly conduct code. Our staff contact on this is Mr. Gaden.
Thank you, Mayor. Back in June 16th, 2020, Council went through a detailed discussion of provisions of the disorderly conduct code that they would like to see changed. I placed those into this ordinance, as well as a number of provisions changes that Councilmember Meadows sent to me in follow-up to that meeting. Essentially, I put in every change that was requested at the meeting that night, and that's what's presented to you here today. It appears that the HRC has also presented council with their version.
Great, thank you for that. So we have two different ordinances here that we can, well, they're the same ordinance, but some different language in both of these. Very happy to discuss going forward. I know I reviewed the HRC's changes. We do have a couple of members of the HRC here as well. If council has specific questions on changes that they made, I would ask that Emily let, I believe it was Karen who offered that. I don't know if there was like a discussion before that they wanted Karen to speak on behalf, but Karen to come in and kind of answer some questions here. If that'd be okay with you, Emily. I believe her number was the one that ended in 858, if I'm not mistaken.
Aaron, I did have a question for Mr. Yaden.
Yeah.
Mr. Yaden, I didn't realize that Mark, that former Councilmember Meadows followed up with you outside of that meeting. And that meeting was so long ago and our changes were so vast, I would not be able to identify which were his changes that were not discussed in that meeting. Do you recall any specifics about which ones he proposed? Just because they happened outside of that discussion is the only reason I'm curious.
Not off the top of my head. I don't recall. I would have to dig up his email, but they were part of what was discussed, and he just handed me his written version of that. So he, as my recollection is, it was just a written version of what he discussed that evening.
Okay. I think I might have gotten a copy of that. That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions for, sorry, Mr. Yaden or Karen, who's on the phone now, I see, just in regards to HRC specific changes?
I did have a question. I actually spoke with Karen on the phone earlier today. And then I also, Acting Chief Gonzalez generously made himself available to answer some of my questions earlier as well. And in my conversation with him, something came up that I had not already addressed with Commissioner Doheny. Chapter 31 of our conduct code right now is this sort of odd provision dealing with fires. And that was the HRC wholesale struck several fairly significant chapters out of this code, and that was the subject of my conversation with Commissioner Honey. But this was one of the ones that was struck, but it was not one of the ones that I talked with her about. And then after my conversation with Steve, I kind of got a lot more clarity about why this is in our code. And it has to do with, it would apply to any fire, but the way that it has been used, mostly in East Lansing, is with our sporting celebrations and the tendency of certain individuals in our community to light furniture on fire. And so this is a crowd control tactic. So I just, Commissioner Honey, in HRC's discussion of this, what was the thinking behind completely striking this one from the code?
Are you talking about, was it specifically about fires, or was it the whole riot? The whole riot clause?
This is specifically about fires. We talked about the riot one. This is the one about people being within 300 feet of a structure fire, vehicle fire, or unlawful fire. It's chapter 31.
To be honest with you, I really don't recall our reasoning behind that. I recall, as we talked on the phone earlier, our reasoning behind striking the whole riot thing, just because we felt that it gives a lot of discretion and raises a lot of concerns about gatherings of 3 or more people and all of that. But I'm going to see if anybody else from the HRC, I just kind of defaulted to being the person online with y'all. So if I'm texting, I'm texting with a few other a few other commissioners. So I'll see if anybody can jog my memory on that one. And I just wanted to say to all of you, basically what I said to Jesse earlier on the phone. We have no expectation that the city council is going to take our recommendations as is and just roll with them. We just wanted to give our input, understanding that it's ultimately your decision. And so we really do appreciate you all the time and effort that you've put into this, going over this yet again. And I can speak personally for myself and say I have great confidence in this city council. And we certainly didn't enter into this with the expectation that every suggestion that we made was going to be incorporated by the city council. So what you said makes sense to me about burning couches. And I think that, yeah, that makes sense to me. Y'all are the ones that will ultimately decide on this. So, okay, someone's texting me right now. 18 covers everything that 31 needs for public safety purposes, but removes the discretion that we are concerned may be abused.
Got it.
Which one?
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I'm sorry. What number?
I'll read it again. It says that 18 covers everything that 31 needs for public safety purposes, but removes the discretion that we are concerned may be abused.
Just for council members who don't have this directly in front of them, although you probably all do, I always have a terrible time finding things in agendas. 18, as written, so it's going to be, this conversation is going to be muddled because we're working off of so many different things. So as the HRC edited it, 18 is the one that deals with refusing an order from a police officer. So it's physically obstruct or hinder any member of the police force, any peace officer or firefighter in the discharge of their lawful duties. So it would kind of essentially, the vague language has been tightened up and it's kind of just directed that, you could not hinder a police officer in the discharge of their duties, and that any action that hindered them would then therefore be covered by that code.
Can I add that Crystal just texted me and said she is also on the line, I think still, and would like to be added so that she can give input too. Is it possible to still do that?
Yeah, that would be fine. I did see Councilmember Bacon and then the city manager maybe as well.
Hi.
Okay. Oh, there's that. Okay.
I did sit in on this revision in the last RC meeting, and really great job. It was very thorough, and just they were at it. It was tough. Maybe I'm misunderstanding how you're interpreting discretion. I find 18 provides broad discretion, and then 31 would be the opposite of, feels like the opposite of discretion. Maybe I'm misinterpreting discretion, because 18 is pretty broad. Like I could see simplifying the code if we're saying that's the point of simplification, but that's a pretty broad code. And then I think 31 was pretty specific around, like said, around the couch fires or the giant bonfires or whatever, something along those lines. Can you walk me through the logic around that discussion?
Sorry, my dog's learned. If I may, so the logic or rationale behind that was the subjectivity of some of the laws and the probability or the chance of them being stacked, of being a person being charged with more than one offense, which has occurred where they applied an offense, a similar offense or an issue was like hindrance. So under, I believe 31, it was saying failure to comply within a reasonable amount of time to an officer's request or fire officer request to vacate or, remove from the premises of a fire. And so 18 speaks to that as well, with the aspect of like hindering or obstructing an officer from their lawful duty.
Just again, stacking is kind of what you're talking about.
So maybe I'll ask a question to the city attorney then. So let's say a situation, or maybe this is something for the deputy chief as well. Let's say a situation occurs where there's a fire, it's a couch, and fire police official determines a public danger exists and orders folks to vacate. Would they be then charged with both that 31 and 18, or is that specific, or would that be able to be stacked, I suppose, if that's their concern?
No, we don't stack charges. The charges, there has to be different conduct for people to be charged with multiple offenses. So one conduct in refusing to comply with a police officer's order would result in one charge. It wouldn't result in two charges for the same conduct.
So you're saying is the behavior itself. So if the behavior itself is not complying with the officer asking, and the behavior is not vacating the premises, that is one action, and therefore there would only be one charge associated with it.
True, but sometimes multiple charges can come. Like for instance, if they fail to vacate the premises, so then the officer goes to make a custodial arrest, and the person physically obstructs the officer at that point during the arrest, that's considered a separate type of conduct. So that brings in separate charges.
So,
or at least the potential for separate charges.
That's our concern.
Okay. Maybe I could ask a question to the deputy chief, specifically this clause 31. Do you have the document in front of you by any chance?
I do.
Great. Could you run us through from your perspective why this has been in here, when it's been used, and kind of just respond to some of the things that have been talked about?
Sure. So subsection 31 has gone through a couple different changes over the last several years, but really this subsection is designed for the couch fire, for the mattress fire that gets started in the middle of the street, and there is a large crowd or a medium-sized crowd, if you will, that starts to gather around it. We all know that when those fires start in the middle of the street, it really is a draw for people to gather around, and the longer those fires go, the bigger that crowd gets and the more unmanageable it gets. So subsection 31 allows the police department and the fire department to order people to vacate from that fire and get 300 feet away. That allows for two things. One, it allows obviously for the fire department to get in there and extinguish the fire if need be. And then two, it also allows for its crowd management technique to disperse that crowd and get people away. Individuals that refuse to do so after being given an order can be arrested for violating subsection 31 or ticketed for violating subsection 31. They would not be cited or arrested also for subsection 18, which is the hinder and obstruct subsection. And like the city attorney had mentioned, there would have to be additional conduct for us to stack that charge. There would have to be another act other than just not leaving the premise or the area around the fire. So while while 31 really does speak to structure fires, vehicle fires, it's really designed for unlawful fires. So those fires that start in the middle of the street, post a basketball game or football game, something like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that gives me some good context. Anybody else from council have kind of a follow-up on that or want to discuss a little bit more?
I think that is essentially the conversation that Stephen had earlier today. So thanks, Steve. I think one of the things that came up with me, I don't know how it's best to structure this discussion, Mayor. So maybe, so I think to me, the most discussion that I see happening here is under Chapter 1, which is the Intoxication Clause, which, so these are kind of like, so there's disorderly conduct, and then there's disorderly conduct within the context of East Lansing and knowing our community and knowing the types of problems that we have. So like just public intoxication in general is probably in a lot of people's disorderly conduct codes. Other communities don't have, regular huge draw public gatherings that are primarily focused around, rooting for your sports team and consuming as much alcohol as possible. So East Lansing has a few unique circumstances that mean that parts of our code kind of have higher prominence. So anyway, in my mind, the most conversation to be had in that regard is around chapter number 1, the intoxication chapter, chapter number 10, which is the riot and the unlawful assembly, and then the one that we just talked about with the fire. So maybe it might make more sense to go and look at the ones that are not going to be heavily discussed and kind of say okay on those and get them out of the way and then come back to the big discussion so that we've at least got that part done. Or we could just dig into it.
So my thought process on how you move this forward was because we had an ordinance originally here and we could make amendments to it based on what some of the HRC's recommendation were. My thought, and of course I'm very open to this not happening, and if there's some other way that folks want to do things, is to make maybe a motion in favor of the one prepared by our city attorney, and then make amendments necessary with, additions, subtractions, or edits based on what that HRC ordinance, or sorry, the recommendation was. But that was just kind of my thought to put it in more of a formal way so we can get through it.
So I would actually, after having read through the HRC's recommendation, I actually think that their consideration of like all of the other chapters besides those big 3 ones are actually better than ours. They really follow ours very concisely, but like just for an example, chapter 2 is the public exposure one. So it's, willfully exposing your genitalia. So then we don't really need chapter 6, which is the swim and bathe in the nude, right? Because like if you're swimming and bathing in the nude, then we can just cite you under chapter 2. So they've deleted that one because it's covered. And then the prowling one has been added to the one about peeping. The gambling, maintaining a gambling den has been added to loitering at a gambling den or frequenting a gambling den, which I still think that's ridiculous, but I do understand why it's in there. So I actually think other than those big 3 conversation ones, I would rather move the HRC's edits because I think that they're fairly well considered. Because it's going to be less individual editing. If other people feel the same way, if other people think that ours is fine, then we should start with ours, but there's going to be a lot of edits either way.
Other council members, comments on that? Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock, and then Councilmember Watson.
Lisa, your mic takes a second to catch up, so.
Lisa, I still can't hear you. All right, Councilmember Watson, go ahead, and then we'll head back to.
Okay. All right. So my first question and then comment, what does the reserved mean?
Reserve means deleted, basically.
Okay. All right. And so I was just going to say, it seems like when I look over it that the HRC added, but they didn't change anything that the attorney reviewed. And so I would be in favor of approving what the attorney did in the red and then going back to what the HRC added, because I'm just not seeing that they disagreed with what changes were made in red.
No, I don't think they took out any of our changes. They just added to them. Yeah.
Okay.
But that would mean that every addition had to be noted as a amendment. So.
Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock. You got your mic working.
Okay, thank you. When can we start meeting in City Hall again? Too many little plastic pieces here.
Aaron's in City Hall right now. I'm just going to say that.
Well, he's the mayor. I may join you next time. Socially distanced. I agree with Councilmember Gregg. I do have concerns with Section 31. I agree with Chief Gonzalez. We have, and with Mayor Pro Tem Gregg about 1 and 31. We have some unusual circumstances, and charged correctly, there should be no stacking. And I think that if there is stacking, or if there is any even whiff of perhaps racially based, I think attorneys are well onto that. We will not prosecute that way. I mean, the original citation the police report may include indicators of all these things, but we have a choice in our prosecution role. And I think it's the will of City Council that we will not stack cases.
So I think that might be a separate policy discussion, honestly. I don't think that's
agreed.
Yeah, I understand what you're getting at. I just don't think that's necessarily addressed in this. Okay, so then I'll look for a motion. I will say I am somewhat concerned that, just based on the fact that we did have, obviously our attorney draft, the one that our attorney draft that we, I don't know if there was an attorney present for the HRC's meeting, but just because as we go through line by line, Mr. Gaden, I might ask you to just chime in if there are any areas where you think wording needs to be changed or there might be a concern. Just from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, perhaps because of the number of changes, it would be best to give, because staff had a review of what the city attorney recommended after the council process. But this is all obviously very significant changes. Should we have a period for the chief and the attorney to go back and us to go back through it and come up with a new set of recommendations? Because I mean, there's, as Mayor Pro Tem Gregg pointed out, there is a history in East Lansing of celebratory events and things that are unique to East Lansing, that some of these things we might want to consider more fully and have a little bit of time with that, because like I said, these are very significant changes. I wasn't sure which direction council would go on that, but it might be useful to take it in that direction.
Okay, go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
So I think I actually also brought this up at the RHC today at the Responsible Hospitality Commission. And in my discussion with them, I mentioned that I thought it was actually fairly unlikely that we would actually pass this tonight, just because of the vast number of changes. So if we're not actually voting on it, just because it is a shocking volume of it's 12 pages long, and then there's hundreds of edits in here. Perhaps what we could do is just, and I also see that we don't want to be here until midnight tonight, but maybe what we could do is go through it essentially the way that we did in our first discussion, but with the HRC's edits. So instead of discussing the ordinance as written, we would discuss the ordinance as written by the city attorney with the HRC's edits where we thought they were appropriate. And then can essentially ask Mr. Yaden to, again, compile this in a legal form and then give staff a chance to review it. And then we would come back and we would vote on something that was essentially in the form to pass it. Not because I'm trying to delay this, but because
Okay.
it's important.
All right.
and
No, I understand where you're getting at. I agree with you, and I'll agree with the city manager on this, that maybe more time is necessary. So I'm going to try and somewhat speed it along, and we will try to go through. I'm gonna try and go through a little bit line by line here, and we can give direction to staff and our city attorney on how to proceed based on both what the HRC has put out there, and then hopefully we're gonna get a staff recommendation on this. Does that make sense to the city manager, to city attorney, to everybody?
So you're going to do a review now and discuss it, and then are you going to ask for our feedback now, or we're just going to hear your feedback and then provide feedback at a later time?
Feedback at a later time.
Okay.
Yep. Does that make sense?
Feedback at a later time on an essentially like ready document that has, right, yeah.
Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody comfortable with that? Is that okay from a staff angle that we're doing that? Okay. All right, great. So let's start at number 1. So the be intoxicated in a public place and be endangering directly the safety of another person or property. I'm not going to read the entire thing right here. This originally did not have a change in it based on our city attorney's response. It was completely struck by the HRC, looking for counsel to weigh in on this. If we want individuals like our deputy chief or city attorney to speak on the matter, please feel free to ask. Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm speaking a lot on this because I did a lot of work on it today. So I'm not trying to speak over anybody. If anybody else has got other stuff to do, chime in. So actually, this was one of the ones that specifically came up with the RHC, and I had a conversation with Pat Riley, who is one of the owners of Harper's, about what significance intoxication plays in the way that they enforce uncomfortable situations in the bar, which would, theoretically apply to many establishments downtown East Lansing. So I think the argument from the HRC is, at least as I understand it, with my discussions with the people that I talked to this afternoon, is that intoxication in general is not illegal. So like you can be intoxicated walking down a street as long as you don't mess with anybody. As soon as you begin endangering the safety or property of another person, then then it becomes illegal. And it's not illegal because you're intoxicated per se, it's illegal because you're messing with something. And so the argument, I believe, from the HRC is that that is covered very thoroughly in other parts of the code. So what came up with my conversation with Steve and with my conversation with Mr. Riley is it's not the actual destruction of the property, it's the endangering part of it that is not covered in any other part of our code. So if you have somebody who is drunk and disorderly, but not actually fighting with somebody, or not actually, so like they are kind of getting there, then you can essentially stop a worse situation from happening by charging them with this endangering part of being intoxicated. And it gives them a way to control people who could escalate violence without having it escalated. And the specific scenario that was outlined is somebody who has been kicked out of a bar because they're too intoxicated. So they haven't actually done anything, they're just too drunk to serve. And so those people are generally not behaving with a high level of judgment, and they don't just go home, they linger outside of the bar. So if they're on the street in front of the bar, we can't say that they're trespassing because they're in a public street. We can't say that we're arresting them because they're drunk, because it's not illegal to be drunk. So it's when they start to involve in harassing behavior, either like continually approaching the the doorman, or, yelling things at patrons who are leaving the bars, or just behaviors that could very well escalate into a much more negative situation, then we have this chapter of the code that allows us to arrest them and place them into our care. So that would be the argument for keeping it. And just my sense from the downtown alcohol serving community, at least the one member that I had a long conversation with, and then just the HRC in general, the RHC in general, from the feedback that they got to me, is that this is actually kind of an important part of enforcing nightlife downtown. So I would argue keeping it.
Okay. Any other council opinion on that? Go ahead, Councilmember Bacon.
Yeah, I support what you're saying, particularly in de-escalation. We're talking about the ability to de-escalate. You're assuming there's one of these, but if you got 100 of these or multiples, even 2 of these encounter each other, now you got something. So the ability to neutralize the 1 before it becomes the 2 or the 10 or I think that's the point of this part of the ordinance. I think that makes it important when we're talking about reducing how we encounter and how the police show up and that stuff. We want to give them the tools to stop it at 1 or stop it at 2 versus letting it turn into multiples of multiples. So I think this looks important for that.
Okay. I would agree with kind of everything that's said here. Are there any other opinions want to be voiced on this specific one?
I have a question.
Yep.
This is for Steve. I was wondering what role you or the police department played in the changes. What participation you had in this?
We were consulted originally back in June during the first round of edits, just with some certain thoughts, specifically with the riot subsection, so subsection 10 and all of the associated behaviors. And we gave our opinion, and that's all.
Okay, and are you letting us know tonight what strikes you might find particularly alarming, or is that Mayor Pro Tem what you're speaking to?
I think that's what we said. We're gonna take what you're saying and then get back to you, and not get back on a one-on-one basis, and not piece by piece tonight, but in aggregate, look at it all after you've had your shot at it, and then come back with all of it from the city attorney, police chief, and myself.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So I think you have guidance, at least in this first one. I'm going to move on to the second, which is the knowingly engaged in any indecent or obscene conduct, and then the HRC added willfully exposing one's buttocks or genitalia in any public place, and then struck the knowingly engaged in any indecent. I hope that folks have this pulled up, but or knowingly make any immoral exhibition or indecent exposure of their person. So we had originally, not originally, it's obviously the ordinance itself was the original, but the changes that were proposed were just to change his or her to their, and not change the really the content of it overall. But the HRC had made it, I think, a little bit more specific, that is willfully expose one's buttocks or genitalia in any public place. This is also addressed in the riot condition, but it's obviously under that, guys. So it's when there is or there are participating in a riot, there's exposing their buttocks, genitalia, or if a female dress. Sorry, go ahead.
Riotous mooning, different than regular mooning.
So the HRC had provided a little bit of a more specific outline of this rather than simply saying indecent or obscene conduct. So feel free to discuss if Deputy Chief or Mr. Yaden or George, if you guys want to chime in at any point, please just let me know. That's okay as well.
I liked the HRC's edit. I thought it got to the crux of the matter without any of the judgmental language of immoral, indecent that are, it very specifically outlines what we will not accept in terms of public nudity. So I liked willfully expose one's buttocks or genitalia in any public place as chapter 2.
Council members, staff, thoughts? Mr. Yaden?
I just getting some mixed messages here. Did you want us to chime in tonight on these, or did you want us to consolidate our thoughts and get them to you in one written memo after.
Sorry, I am sending a little bit of mixed messages here. I wanted to have an open conversation about it. I am trying to get council's perspective on this, and I'm saying if anything pops out to you immediately, then just feel free to chime in. That's more. Sorry.
I think it would be useful for myself and the chief and city attorney to have some discussion sometimes. So perhaps it is easier if we just, I guess if something jumps out at us, we can say it. But at this point, it might be easier for us to have a little bit of.
Okay. All right. My bad.
My thought.
No, that's all good with me. Honestly, I'm just trying to make sure that staff feels comfortable, saying something if necessary. Okay. So council then will continue that discussion. So Mayor Pro Tem was okay with the HRC's changes and preferred those. Any other thoughts? Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock.
I think I like willfully, that keeps the intent, and I think it's well written. So thank you.
Okay, I'm okay with this change as well. I'll wait to see what staff's opinion on it is. That might sway my opinion, but I am okay with this change as it is as well. I'll just note that that kind of like immoral exhibition, indecent exposure. One of the issues that got brought up to me by Nell Kumanich was breastfeeding in public. Not that I think that we're going to be arresting over that, but just kind of outlining that there is a little bit of gray area there, and this would more formally state that this is what we're looking at, not something along those lines. So yeah. All right, great. I think that there's some direction on that. Number 3, just charge any firearms, air rifle, slingshot, nor shall any person have any air rifle or slingshot in their possession in any street, park, except the same be securely wrapped or encased. There weren't any changes to this on either, except for changing his or her to their. So I'm going to move on from this one. Number 4, engage in peeping in the windows of any inhabited place. The HRC had added what was a clause later on, I believe, in the document that was prowl about any or about the private premises of any other person not without authority or permission of the owner of the premises. So that was what the HRC had. I think somewhat consolidated 2 different points in this, but Councilmember's thoughts.
I guess this is one where I would want a question from the chief, is whether there's a benefit to having those split into 2 separate clauses, or if combining things with or clauses is okay.
From an operational standpoint, I think the combination is okay. Legally, I think we would want to have the city attorney weigh in on it.
Okay.
And from my perspective, you just have to be careful when you combine things, because you can end up inadvertently defining what prowling means.
Yeah.
As limited to the peeping type of activity. So my preference would be to split them back out and then define prowl. The dictionary definition is to be in search of loot or prey, something of that nature. And that's, I think, what we've gotten, and when we get instructions from the court, something along those lines. So it's not supposed to be just on somebody's property, but you're supposed to be misbehaving on somebody's property by searching for, things to steal or things of that nature. So.
Okay. Council guidance on this towards staff?
This is one that I would be okay leaving in as 2 separate chapters. I think peeping and prowling are 2 fairly distinct activities. And so having them split apart makes sense to me. So leaving it as chapter 4, just engage in peeping in windows of any inhabited place, and then leaving 19, which is the one that was combined, as prowl about any, I think we struck alley, didn't we, in ours? I don't
Yeah,
remember, but
we
yeah,
did, and it was struck in the HRCs as well.
Yeah.
Great. Councilmember Watson.
Why was the alley part struck? I would be in favor of keeping it.
That kind of spoke to an earlier conversation that we had just in regards to like alleys in East Lansing in general, and just being in a place, right? I'm not going to be able to recall the conversation perfectly. George, do you remember what that centered around?
I thought that the alley had to be, I thought it had to be on private property, but perhaps the city attorney can clarify whether alley means a private alley or if it's a public street, like a public alley that we have, because you can be on a public street.
Yeah, alley was in there to include both private and public alleys. And I think the thought is that you still have to be prowling. So you still have to be, it didn't prohibit just walking down an alley. You had to be, in search of loot or prey, or actually prowling while you were walking down an alley. And I think the chief may tell you, we get a lot of these kind of incidences where people are looking for parked cars and alleys and so forth, and secreting themselves in the alleys while they prowl. And so that's why alley was originally in there. I think it was struck because there were concerns that it was prohibiting people from just walking down an alley, or making that illegal, or giving at least the discretion to police to arrest for that rather than for the prowling aspect of it.
Folks' opinions on that?
I could see that perspective where someone would challenge or push back on the fact, just kind of by locale or location, that was the reason they were stopped or detained versus their behavior or suspicion or something like that. Almost like, they just waited for me to get to the alley in order to, that was the point of, of contention or something like that. It seems a little too specific. There's probably multiple reasons by that point to already have stopped or detained this person, other than I wouldn't want that to be the reason why, if in case this was a bad actor or something like that. It seems really specific. So.
Sure, I would agree with that. And I suppose I go back to something that Mr. Gaten said before, which is further defining like what prowl means, maybe even in this ordinance, understanding that comes from the court. I just, I'm not a public safety official, and I am also not an attorney, so I'm not going to sit here and tell people what that job is. But just as a citizen, I wonder about like how do you prove somebody was walking around trying to steal something out of a car, or scoping it out. I suppose it's up to discretion. There's probably a lot of other factors that go into it, but yeah. Maybe further defining that makes me.
May I interject?
Go ahead.
So I just want to remind the council the rationale or the reasoning behind making changes to this ordinance was to reduce the probability or the instances of individuals being overly charged for a crime. And so the point is to remove the subjectivity, and it's a lot of subjectivities in the points of alley, this, that, and the other. And so, yes, you can make the ordinance longer by putting in clear definitions. But even to Councilman Gregg's example of item number 1, the example that she gave is a person who is accosting someone who is drunk. So inadvertently, you're arresting that person for public intoxication. And so if a person is accosting someone under 7, it is covered if they are interfering with a person's ability to do their job. And so I, want to remind you guys what's the point of the intention behind this ordinance, or the revision of this ordinance, is to remove the subjectivity and the abuse that has occurred under it. And I also challenge the notion of, charging someone with item number 1 versus item number 2. It's still under disorderly conduct. Is there a degree to the different charges? And to my understanding, the degree is the number of charges stacked against someone versus charging them for ending any incident under the ordinance.
Thank you for that. So back to the issue at hand, number 4. Any other direction that we want to provide staff in terms of this one?
Okay, the reason I asked about the alley part is just imagining myself just walking around and just being startled or just concerned about how someone or where someone came from. And so that's why I asked about it, and might be in support of keeping it on there, but I understand what everybody else is saying.
Okay. So I think there is direction on this in terms of, and please interrupt me if I am misstating this, but direction in terms of keeping number 4 as it is and further defining prowl, still maintaining that any alley is struck. Just again, I know that there is disagreement about that, but I've heard the majority of people say they were okay with striking that. And then, yeah, so further defining that prowl clause. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm getting yeses. 5 is reserved. 6 in the ordinance prepared by the city attorney. This was not changed in the ordinance prepared by the HRC or recommendations prepared by the HRC. This was struck. Swim or bathe in the nude in any public place. I will just say, if the changes to, indecent exposure, or willfully exposed buttocks or genitalia in public place, I suppose I might look to staff for a reason on both of them. I understand, maybe from an outside perspective, reading both of these, that they might be considered kind of the same thing. I guess swim or bathe is an extra layer onto it, but I would say that exposing that would be the same thing under disorderly conduct. That's my thought, at least. Any other council members or staff want to weigh in on that? Go ahead.
I'm good with just exposed in general and not swimming specifically. I think that this one could be struck.
Okay. All right. And I'll wait to hear staff formal opinion on that as well whenever we get this back. So, okay. 7, this was one that we had changed a little bit of wording on when we discussed this the first time, and I think the HRC went further on it. So I'll read the original wording that our city attorney had prepared, and then I'll go through our HRC recommendation. So the wording that the city attorney had prepared, it was accost, molest, either by touching or by word of mouth or by sign or motion, any person in any public place with intent to abuse that person or culpably offend that person. That was what we had changed it to originally, or proposed to change it to. The HRC had added the word physically in the beginning, so physically accost, and then any person in any public place with intent to interfere with or abuse that person, period. So I think just some wording changes in here, obviously physically being, I think, a big key one. But yeah, please feel free to discuss both of those changes.
I've never been physically accosted. I guess that might tell you something about me. But I've certainly had obscenities yelled at me, and I didn't enjoy it. I also didn't call the police and have anybody charged with disorderly conduct, but words and motions can definitely feel like being accosted. I guess I just don't know that it elevates to the level of a misdemeanor. That's the start of a discussion, I guess.
Other council members? Okay, seeing none. So I suppose this is probably one that I'm going to look to staff to give me a little bit better perspective on whenever this comes back, just because I think both somewhat get to the same point, but obviously the HRC's adds a little bit more perspective into it. So I will wait for staff. I am honestly, I'm okay with either, but I would like to know what the ramifications for each are. So that is my direction at this point, if that's okay with other folks. Okay. Great. So the next one is 8. This is urinate or defecate, and originally or spit, but that was taken out in both versions on any street, sidewalk, alley, park, parkway, parking lot, or structure public carrier. And I will not finish this thought, but there weren't any edits from our city attorney's prepared ordinance to the one prepared, or the recommendations prepared by the HRC. So as long as everybody's still okay with that change, to just get rid of really or spit, then I am okay with moving on from this one. Is that all right? Great. Next one is disturb the peace. So disturb the public peace, and I will again read our one that was prepared for us, and then I'll go over to the HRC. So disturb the public peace and quiet by engaging in any fight or brawl in any public place was the one that was provided to us by our city attorney. HRC's recommendation on this was disturb the public peace by engaging in any fight or brawl in any public place. Actually, it was like the same. I am not reading it incorrectly.
They removed the word quiet.
Quiet, okay.
So this is just disturb the public peace by engaging in any fight, brawl, or any public place.
I cannot imagine that the difference there has ever, if there is a fight, I don't know if Steve has ever said, well, it's a pretty quiet fight, so we might not do anything about it. So I don't know the ramifications for that, but I'd be okay with either of those. I think that they both further define that we're talking about a fight or a brawl, which is, I think, important, rather than just louder, boisterous conduct. So I'm okay with both versions, but again, I will, this is one that I will probably look to staff to, if there is a specific reason why and quiet needs to be in there, then I am fine to hear that, but I am okay with that being out as well if there isn't. Great, so now we're on, is that okay with everybody? Before we move on to the next?
Remove quiet and to move to the next one? Or
This is one that I'm more just looking for staff's opinion. I am okay with either version. I don't, again, I'm assuming here, I don't imagine that and quiet is something that is very, very necessary for it. But I'm not super positive. So I'm kind of waiting to hear back from staff if they bring this back.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So we're on our next, which is 10, and this has a bunch of subsections. So this is probably the one that we're going to talk about the most. So this is the riot clause, which the HRC had actually gotten rid of. I believe all, is that correct? All of these clauses in their recommendation?
Yep, completely struck chapter 10. Can I speak to this one a little bit,
Yeah.
Aaron?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the argument, so looking at each individual, so as it's written right now, it defines riot as it is defined in our state statute. So the Act 302 of the state law defines a riot as 4 or more other persons with the purpose of engaging in conduct constituting the crime of riot, or be present at any assembly that has either has or developed such a purpose and remain thereat with the intent to advance such purpose. So that's a riot as defined by state law. And 4 people constituting a riot, I mean, I guess they'd have to be very riotous, but that's what our law says. So, and then each one of the, A through N, I do think that these are primarily addressed by other parts of the code. Throwing, damaging, exposing buttocks, again, riotous mooning. Interestingly, and very 2020 related, when we first talked about this, masks weren't a thing. Now everyone wears masks. So we did not address the wearing a mask or taking other measures to hide your identity, but I think we would have maybe struck that if it was happening right now. refusing to leave, starting a fire. I mean, all of these are kind of involved in other things. So in my talk with Steve earlier today, what mechanisms do the police have to dispel a crowd without saying this is a riot? And it sounds like there really are not any. If the crowd is, if it's a fight, right? If it's 6 people fighting, you can dispel it as a fight. But if it is a gathering that is heading towards violence, becoming more animated, we don't really have, I think anybody who's been in East Lansing for any significant amount of time would say, like, if you can stop a post Final Four celebration before it becomes like, if you can kind of identify the point at which it stops being a party and starts being property destruction, and you can kind of head it off and dissolve it before that gets heavily engaged, then that would be a good thing. And so that is kind of when we would say, like, okay, this isn't a party anymore. This is starting to become a riot. And it's not just one officer subjectively saying, like, okay, I don't like where this is headed, I'm going to call it a riot and tell everybody to go home. There's a process. It's like, there's many warnings given. People are told to dissemble, but without some sort of mechanism to declare it an unlawful assembly, we don't really have the authority to go in and break up a crowd just because we don't want them to be crowded together. So we kind of still need something in our code that can define a riot so that we can break them up. Having each one of these crimes individually articulated under that, I would be totally open to that discussion, having all of those removed, as long as we keep what is in our state law, assemble or act in concert. And the reason that, and then the argument there, and the argument that I proposed to Steve earlier, was that we still have that state law that we could charge people under. So then it becomes kind of an issue of magnitude. So the state law, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, the state law is a felony. It's a 10-year or 5-year felony, depending on how it's charged. Our law is a 90-day misdemeanor. So charged at maximum level under our disorderly conduct code, people who were participating in that riot would have a night in jail, a $200 bond. They would have to go to the court, face a judge. The judge would set some sort of fine. Theoretically, it is possible that they could serve 90 days in jail if their conduct was egregious enough that the judge agreed that they should do some time for it. But on their record would be a misdemeanor, and the jail time is very unlikely. And if it does exist, it's much less. Under state law, it's a felony, and it's years, not months. So I think that there is some argument to be made that we should have some mechanism to dissemble people who are gathering unlawfully. So my kind of compromise between our edits and the HRC's edits would be to keep the first part of that clause that is essentially quoted directly from the state law, which is to assemble or act in concert with 4 or more other persons for the purpose of engaging in conduct constituting the crime of riot, or be present at any assembly that either has or develops such a purpose and remain thereat with the intent to advance such a purpose, and strike the rest of it and strike all of the individual chapters under it.
Other council members' thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's kind of perspective. As I look at this ordinance, I think we're assuming it's the peaceful protest that starts this way and then maybe escalates, and then it's how to disperse the peaceful protest. I always view riotous behavior as from the historical perspective. That's why I'm picturing 4 or more people gathering, of
Right.
someone's actual house being burnt to the ground or something along the. That's I don't view kind of riotous behavior as people sitting in that's turned a little crazy or this, that, and the other. So from that perspective, there has to be some type of teeth that deals with that riotous behavior as it turns violent and is focused on a particular group or ethnicity or something like that. That's just how I view for my view. So
Yeah.
I think, can I just make one point and I'll clarify
Sure.
with Steve, is I asked, because that was my feeling too, is that especially right now in this historical moment, when we read riot, we're not thinking Final Four basketball, we're thinking Minneapolis post George Floyd. And so I asked Steve, you know, how frequently we declare a riot and under what conditions riots have occurred in East Lansing, and it is 100% Final Four, 0% racial inequity. Our protest history has been relatively peaceful. And so that is not the way that this is being used, which is not to say that it could not be used that way in the future, which is definitely something that we need to consider. But I think the regular employment of this is absolutely drunk crowds at basketball games.
I assume
Correct me if I'm wrong.
So yeah, I just it's tricky. That's all I'm gonna
It
say.
is. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I cognizant of kind of everything you guys said over here. My city attorney, if you could clarify something for me. So to be charged under this, if I understand the language correctly, they would have to commit one of the acts that is under this riot control. So it's not just the fact that something is a riot as defined by state law, but they actually, for instance, they were damaging, destroying, injuring, or defacing public or private property that is not their own. Is that?
Well, here's the evolution of this ordinance. Originally, it was just how the mayor pro tem had described it, just mirrored state law.
Sure.
And then the prosecutions over the years, we wanted to define what it meant to remain there at with the intent to advance the purpose, because you have to distinguish between those that are there observing and those that are there with the intent to advance the purpose of the riot.
Sure.
So this laundry list of acts was just a historical perspective of what we have viewed people doing that shows that they're intending to stay there to advance the purpose of the riot, as opposed to intending to stay there simply to observe what is going on. So this is more of an informational provision than anything else to the individuals that are there. So they know that if they're adding furniture to the fire that's in the middle of the street, that we're going to view that as participation in the riot. You know, that's an obvious one. But you know, the participating in the chants, the wearing of masks, and that's the thing that we've noticed in the past, where it's obvious to us as we watch these riots that these are actual participants as opposed to you know, innocent observers. So that's where the list came from. And it's you know, again, that's why I like meddling with a deployed riot control agent. Like if somebody picks up a tear gas canister and throws it back at the police, we viewed that as they're there to advance the purpose of the riot. They're not just observing, because the rule is generally when there's a riot and the police say, you know, declared an unlawful assembly, they tell people that they have to go home. You know, and the rule is you're supposed to go home because that's what makes the city safe again. This type of conduct is again just what we've observed where they're participants. So when you're taking stuff out of here, you're saying that you can do this during a riot and not be considered a participant of the riot, not being there with the intent to advance the purpose. So I just want you to understand, you know, what the ramifications are of removing each of these.
Thank you.
So this is, yeah.
No, continue. If I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, and I was basically done, but I'm just saying that this is just a definition of what it means, because that's how we've prosecuted these in the past. It's hard to prosecute someone to that, because you don't know whether they were originally assembled there for the purpose of constituting the crime of riot. So we've always prosecuted by that people by that last portion, where once it develops into a riot, they remain thereat with the intent to advance the purpose. That's historically the clause under that state law that we've prosecuted these people. Also, I think the reason that we've kept this as a disorderly conduct was also because we understand that you know, a lot of these are students that prefer to be charged with disorderly conduct as opposed to a felony.
Yeah. And honestly, I will say, you know, that is, if you're going to give me any reason to keep something like this in our disorderly conduct, you know, code, I think it's a pretty dang good one. Is a misdemeanor versus a felony, if the state law were to be used in that. Any other council thoughts on this? No offense, Mayor Pro Tem, but I do want to get other people's thoughts as well.
I think it's too bad that it sounds like the attorney gave his thoughts and HRC came together, gave their thoughts. And it sounds like you all are saying you're going to go on afterwards with the city attorney and city manager and ELPD to give your thoughts. And it just kind of feels like it's too bad there can't be something jointly that's provided to us that everyone is in support of, or maybe just has some minor comments about.
So what would you propose then?
Well, I was asking when ELPD was looped in, like when did you guys see the final revamp, Steve? Or the revamp by the HRC? When did you get your eyes on it? Or like I said, were you sitting in the meeting or listening?
I saw the HRC edits early this morning once it was posted to the agenda. I wasn't provided those beforehand.
Yeah, I just think it's too bad that it feels like, you know, we're going to talk about something, but then there's going to be another meeting and another group is going to go back and talk about something. And then, you know, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the thoughts that were provided? And I wish we could all be at the table together now and decide what sounds good, what we're all in.
Yeah, I'm very much okay with having. I think we do have a couple of HRC members with us. If we wanna work this out right now, let's work it out. I mean, I agree with you.
Karen Honey got kicked off the line. She sent me a message that her phone disconnected and she hasn't been able to get back in. I think Crystal Davis is still here. I don't know if Chuck is still on the line, but we don't have Karen anymore at the moment.
I see Crystal.
Yes, I'm still here. I agree with Councilman Watson. I think it would be helpful to have more of the HRC available. And I think it would have been helpful, and maybe there is an opportunity for us to reconvene any further edits or voting on this ordinance, where everyone who has a determining factor in this is at the table. So I do think that there's a benefit for the city attorney and Steve Gonzalez to be present at the further discussions, because I know it's a bunch of HRC members who feel kind of strongly about some of the changes that were made.
Go ahead, Councilmember Bacon.
We probably just have to accept that people are going to have different policy views on this stuff, and that council will have to make policy decisions on that. I mean, I don't know if necessarily the chief of police is going to agree with every edit that's given by the HRC, and that's fine, because at some point people will give their different views, and then council can simply weigh in on it and say, yeah, I take what you're saying, chief, but we also understand this need to have lesser policing, and then you weigh those balances. But I don't think there's going to be agreement on all of these issues if we sit down together and have more discussion. I think at this point, they've weighed in pretty extensively. let staff have their shot at weighing back in, and then council can consider it, and we can give council a chance to act on these.
Go ahead, Councilmember Babcock.
Thank you. Yeah, because it's an ordinance, it cannot be changed without the council going through it. So even if it goes back, perhaps this will address Councilmember Watson's concerns. Even if it goes back for review by the staff, it's not changing unless we change it. So, and we will change it by discussing it publicly. So likely this is going to come back to us again. This is part of a process, and it's a little longer maybe, but that may be a good thing. So thank you.
Other members' thoughts? Yeah, I just say, you know, I obviously I was all right with, you know, us getting HRC's perspective, you know, to Councilmember Watson's point. The reason why I just said, you know, if we want to have staff, you know, look at this one more time and just, you know, give us their thoughts as well, is just because I do want to make sure kind of every voice is at the table there. And obviously we can give guidance based on what the HRC had put out here. You know, but I generally don't like trying to pass something that staff hasn't gotten like a full look at, just because I don't want to put that out there. If it's like not possible, you know what I mean? Or if there are changes that we might be running into our own issues by creating. Go ahead, Councilmember Bacon.
Great. Thanks, Lisa, for the guidance on the public portion and the why of it all. But I think maybe focusing the energy on points of contention versus points of agreement. I think some of this seems like really low lift type stuff, and some of them are pretty heavy. So, I mean, getting through the low contentious things and then focusing in on the contentious areas, I think would be, I don't know if that means for efficiency or whatever. We're spending a lot of time on things we have really low contention around, it seems. And there's some areas that look like really heavy lifts, like 10, like Riot. That's a pretty heavy lift. So maybe if we get through the low contention things and then focusing on the harder things, I don't know, whatever that looks like.
I think even with the Riot situation, once the explanation exists that this allows people to be charged with something of a lesser offense, I think then the idea that this is trying to overcharge people or to, you know, increase enforcement kind of goes away. That the idea is to have a tool that doesn't give someone a felony, which I think is a very good thing, you know. So I think that, you know, once some of those points can be made, perhaps we'll see that there's resolve. And there may be ones that like Councilmember Bacon mentioned, where there's just no disagreement at all, and we just say that sounds fine. So maybe just like I said again, I think our shot at going through it can maybe facilitate and highlight where there are areas where it's more disagreement and less disagreement.
Okay, Councilmember Babcock.
Speaking of saving the misdemeanor, I feel very, very strongly that we should save the misdemeanor, and we don't want to open people up to felony charges at the county, state level by not having a misdemeanor to, it sounds counterintuitive, protect them with that 90-day misdemeanor. However, something that perhaps the city attorney can address, or between now and the time we can come back can look into, we probably want our 90-day misdemeanor to mirror the state felony statute as closely as possible, because we don't want to find a situation where a behavior falls into the felony level, but not the misdemeanor, because then we've failed to protect them from a felony. If that makes sense, that may be counterintuitive. I'm not seeing any nods of agreement or horror.
I'm just not an attorney. I would honestly look to our counsel to try and.
Right. Agreed. So Mr. Yaden, perhaps?
The wording does, as Mayor Pro Tem Greg pointed out, the actual wording in the first stanza of paragraph 10 is an exact replica of the state law. So the rest of it is just definitional. So the actual charging of the act or the state statute is in here as it is written under the state law. So
Go ahead.
So it's been some time between the last time it's been some time since I last did criminal law. But if we have a situation where we have an MSU student who participated in some chants or, well, it's kind of weak. If we have an MSU student who was at a Final Four event, you call it celebrations, I'm a little nerdier, I'll call it a riot. And that young adult picks up the tear gas canister and throws it back. We're striking item C, which would be meddling with any deployed riot control agent. So he or she would not be eligible for a misdemeanor charge, for a City of East Lansing charge, but they could then still be held to the felony standard by county prosecutors. Is that correct?
that's technically correct, yes. I think from a practical standpoint, if the city council is going to remove that and someone does that particular act, I don't think that the police department would then seek a warrant through the county prosecutor's office for that particular set of conduct if it's in fact been removed from our code. Although they could, clearly you're correct on that.
I mean, I could see them not bothering if it were, say, chants or taunts, but that could be a more active or more dangerous act, more active participation or more dangerous act, just thinking out loud. So worth considering. Thank you.
Yeah, let's, if Crystal, I know that you're on the line, if you want to weigh in just really quickly on some of this discussion, I have a question for you. Given the conversation that's happening on a misdemeanor charge versus a felony charge for some of this, does that in a way change at least your perspective? I know you're not the full HRC, but change maybe your perspective on the issue or just give me your thoughts.
No, it doesn't change my perspective on the issue. I question the rationale of saving a misdemeanor. I even question to what extent will the county then interfere with a city case to go back and charge someone with a felony crime. I think if you look at even what a misdemeanor could do to a person of having a criminal record, and that's what we're speaking about, is decriminalizing minor infractions. And I think another way to address some of these concerns is through citations and fines and not actual charges that could potentially derail someone's life course perspective. And so again, I challenge you guys to think about why we even approached this disorderly conduct ordinance and what the current political and social climate speaks to. And right now, radical change is needed. Reform is needed.
So, okay, thank you for that. So if we were to get rid of this, then I'm going to ask the question one more time. If we were to get rid of this specific clause in our ordinance here, and say there were state police, deployed to East Lansing because of a something that was declared a riot based on the state statute, and we don't have this in our ordinance, would they be charged with a misdemeanor or a felony, or does that go through our police department anyway? Give me the process for how that happens. Go ahead, you're muted, sorry.
You, Tom.
We have a number of mutual aid agreements with the various police departments for this type of thing. They generally are there for support of our police department. They have the ability, like state police in particular, would have
Yeah.
the ability to seek charges directly through the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office and not go through us. The same is true with the Sheriff's Department. Other jurisdictions like Meridian Township and so forth don't have a jurisdiction to charge independently. They have to go through our prosecution system. But if we don't have a rioting provision, then it either doesn't get charged or it goes through the prosecutor's office as a felony. So those are the two options.
Okay, thank you for that.
Can I raise a point to Crystal's point? So we, in our original discussion of this ordinance, we didn't discuss the charges, and I actually didn't. This is like a huge, missed opportunity on my point, but I didn't realize until I was speaking with Steve this afternoon that that the charges for this code is a 90-day misdemeanor. So I know that we have like a lot of stuff in our criminal conduct code outside of the disorderly conduct code. And I guess this speaks to my lack of experience with law enforcement, but we as a body define the level of crime that, like a speeding ticket is a crime, but you're not going to get charged with a misdemeanor, I guess, unless maybe you are criminally reckless. You're going to get a fine, you're going to get a citation, you're going to get points on your license. The punishment is different. It's not the form of a permanent criminal record. And so, like urinating in public is one that, it's gross, I guess. Is it a misdemeanor? I don't know. So are there some things in here that should just be pulled out of the disorderly conduct code so that they're not charged at that level because they're not serious enough to warrant that type of criminal crime? Riot, I am still sorry, I'm just not there yet. I'm still ready to leave riot in here as a crime, but there's a few other things in here. I guess I'm just not that worried about public nudity. If I see somebody's butt, I don't think they should have a misdemeanor for the rest of their life. I guess there's different levels of exposure and some of them are less benign. So is that are there things here that we could move into a different part of our criminal code so that they're not permanent police record type things?
Is that a question for me?
I guess it's a question for you or possibly a question for Steve.
So, certainly the council has the ability to make offenses civil infractions, which certain offenses, there's some limitations on that under state law, what you can make as civil infractions, but for the most part, council has the ability to make any offense a civil infraction. It doesn't carry criminal charges then, it's just a fine only, up to $1,000 max under our current code, but most likely it's in the $100 or $200 range. Fine is where they're at currently.
And do we have, I guess this is maybe a question for Steve. Are there other parts of our criminal code that deal with things like nudity and or is it just it's here so it's nowhere else?
It's generally dealt with under the disorderly conduct code, although there is a state law for gross indecency that has some different elements, but could apply depending on the circumstances.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
I'm struggling here with how to proceed because I think we're getting some mixed perspectives on this, and usually what I am hoping to do is give our staff at least some clear direction going forward. And I'm feeling a good amount of disagreement. And then there's also a great number of other points being brought up that, haven't been necessarily discussed in public yet in terms of putting things off to civil infractions rather than having them in the disorderly conduct code. So I'm struggling with kind of how to proceed here. Yeah, sorry, Councilmember Babcock, did you have something?
I think if we come back to the conversation, I'll let you go through your points first. Thank you.
So I might request then that we have a couple of members of the council, maybe our HRC liaison, Mr. Bacon, and maybe the mayor pro tem, look into this a little bit more, work with staff, because I do still want to get staff's perspective on the HRC changes, and maybe come back to us with.
Can I propose something,
Yeah.
Aaron? Did we convene a task force that had 2 members of council, 2 members of HRC and staff and work on it together as a group?
I think that would be okay. I'm looking at George and I'm looking at our city attorney. Would that need to be noticed? Would that be an OMA meeting? Would that be something that is public? If it were 2 and 2?
I still think we're going to want to have a discussion with staff directly before that. So I'm not sure how much time that saves, but we're willing to do it, of course, if that's the wish of council.
At
But
this point, I'm not actually willing. I'm not interested in saving time. I'm interested in doing it right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. So I it's already kind of stretched out, and at this point, I think having a better product on the end is better than having it quickly.
Yeah, but I'm still saying, what I'm saying is that we're still going to meet with Steve, and I'm still going to meet with the city, and have an internal discussion, and then we'll sit down for a meeting, because I may need to have these conversations with both the city attorney and the chief to understand the whys, and then we come to consensus, and then it's going to be meeting with a group. So we're fine with that. I'm not sure if it changes the dynamic at all versus having, you already have the recommendations from the HRC and you could have recommendations from staff, but we're willing to do that process if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And honestly, the reason why I bring it up is simply because if my thought process on this originally when it was put on this agenda was that we had our HRC recommendation. We either move one of the original proposed ordinance that was written by our city attorney and make amendments based on what the HRC had proposed, or we would move the HRC proposed ordinance and then make amendments based on that. But at this point, I'm not hearing enough consensus around individual issues to do that, and we also haven't gotten a staff perspective. So I'm okay with delaying this a little bit so we can get all of those factors together. Does that make sense for people? Okay.
And are you saying that the people that come together will include the HRC or would include Ron? Because it just seems like a back and forth that might happen with this perspective and then this other perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that Mayor Pro Tem Greg's take was probably the right way to go about it, which was staff goes and meets and discusses those proposed changes that the HRC did, and then they convene a meeting of Mayor Pro Tem Greg, Councilmember Bacon, 2 members of the HRC, and members of staff to work through, and then bring us back an ordinance to vote on as a council. Does that make sense to folks? Are folks comfortable with that? Does that make sense? Okay, then we don't, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Gaden.
I just want to make clear whether this group of individuals, I'm assuming they don't have any decision-making authority.
No.
So they're not, it's just a recommendation body, and they're not going to be subject to the OMA, and then is that the council's intent?
That is my understanding and intent, unless I am mistaken.
No, that's clearly lawful. I just like to have that clarified so that it's not later,
of course,
charged that there was an OMA violation.
Of course, no, that makes complete sense. Okay, if everybody's okay with that, I don't need a motion on something like that, do I, Mr. Yaden?
No, the lack of a formal resolution is probably makes it better that there's no OMA violations. So,
okay. Everybody comfortable with that? Great. So our next item on our agenda is at the request of the city manager going into closed session to discuss a performance evaluation. To do this, I believe, and I'll ask the clerk to make sure that this is accurate. There needs to be a motion, a second, and then a roll call vote. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then Mayor, can we also confirm that at the end of the executive set, we're jumping into a separate meeting with myself and the 5 council members. I do a brief minutes, but also then we'll be coming back into the regular meeting, this meeting, to adjourn the meeting. So we can't leave from the second meeting. We've got to come back into this meeting. And you should have an account, you should have an email that was sent from Emily during this meeting with the login for the meeting we'd be going into executive session, and then come back again to this meeting to close the meeting.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. So folks that are on the call that are watching right now, you will see a screen that probably says we will be back shortly. We are going to go into closed session in a separate room, and then we will come back to this meeting to close out the formal meeting here. Does that make sense?
Should we stay logged into this meeting and just mute and turn off our video, or should we leave this meeting?
I don't think we can because of the Zoom portal, but let me ask Emily. Emily, can you give us that answer? Can we
Yep,
stay logged?
Nope, you'll need to log out of this meeting, and then I had already sent you the panelist invite this afternoon for this meeting. I believe it actually came under Nicole Bartel's name because I forgot to switch them. And then I sent you via email the invitation for the closed session one. So you'll just need to use the panelist invite one to get back into this meeting. Does that make sense?
The email with closed session is the one for the next session, obviously, correct?
Correct. Yep. And I'm seeing that Councilmember Bacon has already joined. So that would be the one that I emailed you. So use the one from Nicole Bartel to rejoin this meeting.
Okay.
And then we will have a slate up that says that you are in closed session during this time. So it'll still be broadcast.
And
Okay.
Council, do you want to take a quick 5-minute break before we convene into the closed session so that everyone can have their quick break? And
Yes,
then
that'd be great.
I'll see you
let's-
in there in 5 minutes.
Yep. So I will make a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing the city manager's performance at the request of the city manager, who under our charter is allowed to request that be done in closed session.
Lisa.
Seconded by Councilmember Babcock. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Bacon,
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Greg,
Yes.
Mayor Stevens.
Yes. Okay.
Mayor, can I
Yes.
just clarify? So staff who are not needed at this point, Steve Gonzalez, the city attorney, can they jump off at this point because there are no other items at the end of the meeting?
Yep.
And then obviously we need the staff who are running the meeting to stick around, but is that true?
That makes complete sense to me.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I will see you in 5 minutes in the other meeting. Text me or text Emily if you have a problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Waiting on one more council member.
That's Lisa.
Staff there?
Somewhere. She didn't beam in. Her particles are somewhere out in the universe.
I should have told her to search for, there she is.
Right.
Excellent.
Great. So we just concluded our closed session. And I believe all I have to do is say we are now adjourned.
Emily, are we good to just adjourn at this point? Have you have this live?
Yep, we're good. Everything's live still. So
Thanks, Emily.